Hello, and thanks for joining me on Meeting Neighbors and Making Friends. We have a wonderful show today. We have with us Colleen Baldrica. And Colleen, I love to visit with people who write because you have the ability to set the stages for so many people, places, and things and help your readers to let our imaginations run. And this is what you have done in this wonderful little book entitled Tree-Spirited Woman. Colleen, you have a treasure here.
Thank you.
I think it's just great. I have to tell you how I read it.
Okay.
This past weekend, I was up north at Quadna Mountain Resort, and I decided to read your book there. And as I was sitting there looking out at the mounds and mounds of snow and the trees, it was an absolutely perfect setting to read this book. The snow was falling. It was just great. Just tell me, how did you get to write this book or think to write it?
Oh, well, it all kind of started over 30 years ago. And
30.
Over 30 years ago, at that time in my life, I was a single mom, and I had decided to start college.
Mm-hmm.
And I started at Lakewood, which is now Century.
Right.
And while I was there, my first quarter there, I met a Lakota medicine man who was taking a class there. I only knew him as Charlie. I knew him as nothing else.
Oh.
And I was really kind of struggling with my life in many ways. You know, being a single mom, my faith, every aspect of my life. Mm-hmm. And I actually went out behind the college. There's a beautiful woods.
Yes.
And I was hiking in the woods back there. And I was praying. And, you know, I just was asking, what do I do? Where do I go? What do I do with my life? And it was kind of like the trees were talking. And they, you know, basically to lift up my branches, to learn to let go, to trust. Mm-hmm. And I was out there for quite a while. And then when I came back into the school, I saw Charlie. And I honestly felt I could have glowed in the dark. I just felt so calm, so peaceful. And I had said to Charlie, I kind of told him my story. And Charlie looked at me and he said, I am giving you the name. And he said it in Lakota. And he said, that means tree-spirited woman.
Oh.
And I thought about it. I thought, wow. And I thought about it, you know, because I always loved being in the woods. And I didn't think anything more about it, realistically. About a year later, I had a dream that someday I had to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
It would be about a young woman who meets an older woman, and it would take place, and it would be called Tree-Spirited Woman. I did not know much about it other than I knew I needed to grow and mature before I could ever begin this. And then probably 20 years later, I started the book.
Oh, is that
But
right?
I really believed that I had to do this.
Mm-hmm.
It never was something that went out of my mind. I always knew that someday I would write this book because I wasn't a writer. I was just going to college. I just hadn't even started. I was a late bloomer. I didn't consider myself a writer. You know, I mean, heaven's sakes, I was still making my run-on sentences and figuring it out. So to think I would ever write a book was like, never say never. But I believed that I had to do it. And so...
And don't you think that your grandmother had a little bit to do with
Oh, my
what
grandmother...
went into this book?
My grandmother had a lot to do with it. My grandmother and all of her sisters were from northern Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And all of them were taken from their home to attend the Indian boarding schools up in White Earth. And Grandma and all of her sisters really never went back home to their family because in the summer they worked as servants in the towns. And my grandmother always lived near me when I was growing up, but from the time I was in first grade until she died, she lived with us. And my grandmother was my significant person in my life. My grandmother and I were very close. Grandma would talk to me and tell me a lot of things. She wouldn't talk about the boarding school. She wouldn't talk about her experiences. You know, I just have little bits of that.
Right.
Grandma she told me I played basketball, and Grandma was 4'9". And so I used to laugh about that and say, Grandma, you played basketball. But there's one picture we have of her basketball team, and on it says 1919 on it when they were in the school. And then she would also talk about a little bit about in the summertime that she had worked as a servant. But other than that, she would not talk in, it's Ojibwe, Ojibwe now, but Grandma called it Chippewa. And the language, you know, on Chippewa. And so Grandma did not speak. I never heard her speak the language until once we were up north. I have some aunts that owned resorts up there and stayed up in northern Minnesota. And we were up at Aunt Nora's, and adjacent to it was a reservation, and the dogs from the reservation came over and were getting in our garbage, and Grandma went out and yelled at them in Ojibwe or Chippewa. And that was the only time I ever heard her speak it.
Is that right?
So that was pretty cool.
But still, she left a profound impression on you as a child. And she must have lived with you for quite a few years.
She lived with me all of my growing up years.
Oh, so that's such a special bond.
It really was.
I just could really feel your grandmother in the book as I read it.
I have to my mother, I never really told anybody I was writing this story. This was mine, and it was private. So even when it was done and it was getting printed, I finally thought, I have to tell people that I've written this book, because how else am I going to sell it? And when my mom read it after it was printed, she just kept going, I hear Ma in it. Boy, I hear my Ma in it. And she sent it to one of her cousins that still lives up in northern Minnesota, and she said, oh, I see Aunt Lou. I hear Aunt Lou.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Just great.
Cool,
so where did you grow up, actually?
I grew up in St. Croix Beach.
St. Croix Beach, okay.
Which is 12 miles south of Stillwater.
Yes, yes.
So I've lived in
and still live in the same area?
I still live in the same area. I moved about 12 miles from where I grew up.
Okay. And the schools there you went?
I went to Stillwater.
Now, did you have other siblings?
I have 4 other siblings, and I'm the oldest of 5.
Oh, okay.
And it's very interesting because I really knew Grandma well. Because Grandma, you know, I grew up with her. My younger sister is 13 years younger. You know, Grandma died when she was 5.
Oh, sure.
So she didn't get a chance.
Right.
And because Grandma lived with us, many of my cousins never got to know Grandma as well either.
That's right. That's right. There's always a special bond there. We had the same thing as I was growing up, so I know exactly. And I can certainly see that your grandmother was an influence in what you did with your life as far as going into education. And in particular, the further studies, you did some school counseling in your advanced studies, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a school counselor. I worked for St. Paul Public Schools for 23 years, and 17 of those years as a school counselor. The last 4, I was the lead counselor for the district, and so I helped to oversee all the new counselors and all the counselors in the district.
Okay.